Okay, welcome everyone. Wanted to get started here. Just a couple of logistics as we get started. On the right-hand side of your screen, you should see a questions panel. Due to the fact that we've tried to keep this brief and get you back on your day in a half an hour, please feel free to drop any questions you have in there. We'll do our best to try to address them either at the end of the presentation or even after if we did not get to it during the presentation. And we'll go ahead and just make the screen a little bit bigger for everyone. Wanted to welcome you all. We are going to be presenting on taking the hassle out of interview scheduling. One of the reasons that John and I wanted to sit down and share with you some information that we had regarding scheduling is just that we have really good access to a number of organizations regarding their process. We've got a lot of insights into what they're doing, areas where they're facing challenges, as well as making improvements and strides to improve the overall recruitment process by tackling one small piece of it, which we tend to overlook in the process. So we thought we'd share some of the insights that we've got, different things that you may not have thought about in terms of scenarios that you're probably facing on a day-to-day basis. And so that leads me into our sales. My name is Chris Young. I'm the VP of Marketing here at RIVS. And so I spend a lot of time just sitting down and hearing from our clients the stories of improved processes regarding scheduling, administrative tasks, overall successes, tweaking little elements from going mobile to a new applicant tracking system that's got new functionality. And I have the great honor of speaking here today with my colleague, John Kovanda.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Chris, and hi, everybody. Thanks for taking some time out of your day and out of your week to meet with us today. Happy November. As Chris mentioned, my name is John Kovanda. I am the Director of Sales here at RIVS. And before the, oh no, here comes the sales pitch grumble start, I promise everybody that's not why I'm here. If you ask around the RIVS offices who to talk to get excited about interview scheduling, they're probably going to send you in my direction. This has been a bit of a passion project for me. I'm not exactly sure what that says about me, but it is. I've had a really unique opportunity since joining RIVS in 2012 to work with a lot of companies, whether they're RIVS users or not, on the scheduling challenges that they have, and in turn have had a chance to work with our product team to help design some solutions to help in that process. So probably, unfortunately for our development team, I will continue to do that, but I'm really excited to be here with you and share some of the things that we've learned.
Great, and we'd love to get a sense for the number of folks that have joined us today. Just get a sense of what you face on a week-to-week basis in terms of interview volume. So we're going to launch a poll here, get a sense of who has joined us today. Take a second and go ahead and fill out your response. Since who's in the room. Go ahead and share that in a minute. We'll see quite a few responses coming in. So. Thank you all for responding. Let's go ahead and close that out and just pull up the results for everybody. Excellent. So it looks like we've got the two big buckets on the end of the spectrum, those that are kind of doing the lower volume recruiting, and then those that, gosh, sorry, you have to schedule quite a lot of candidates on a weekly basis that are going through the process. So we're going to be able to talk to some of these specific instances. It is kind of funny, John, that we've got the two ends of the spectrum because there's great stuff that we can share here. We could go through.
For sure. Awesome. Okay, so everybody, Chris and I have taken some time and gathered some really interesting data points and insights that we're excited to share with you today. First, I think I want to take a few minutes and take a look at the process of scheduling different types of interviews so that we can understand some of the common hurdles, or as the webinar title would lead you to believe, hassles that we're hearing people running into when it comes to getting candidates in front of interviewers. What we're looking at here is a fairly generic process flow, and we know everybody's process differs a bit. What's really important to understand here, though, is that regardless of the specific steps in your process, what we've learned is there are always going to be certain points where the interview scheduling process can split, or we refer to it as a fork. And every time we hit one of these forks, the process essentially starts over. And this is where we're hearing a lot of the heartache coming from recruitment teams and employers in general in terms of slowing down their process. Because if you take a step back and understand how often this is happening at scale, it becomes a bit astonishing as to how much time this can pull down on your company's resources and slow down your hiring process in general. So we asked everybody to answer the polling question, how many candidates or how many interviews are you in a given week? If we assume, which our data tells us, it takes about 10 minutes on average to schedule every interview, we also know through our users that about 20% of all scheduled interviews, so 1 in 5 interviews, will need to reschedule for some reason, whether that's because the candidate had something come up and they can no longer make their selected time, or the interviewer had a schedule shift and we need to figure out a new time to bring the candidate in for an interview. About 20% of all interviews actually need to be rescheduled. So depending on how you answered the polling question, you can see about how much estimated time you're spending per week just figuring out when candidates can meet for interviews. This isn't even accounting for the time that you're spending actually conducting those interviews. When we first started looking at interview scheduling just as a process, this is what really, really surprised us when we were speaking with companies. As an employer ourselves, we had no idea how much time and investment we were spending just getting candidates scheduled for interviews. So at scale, it is really shocking to see how much time and how many resources an organization can put into getting candidates in front of interviewers. What might have caused us even more heartache when we started to dig into some of these stats is thinking about what we could have been doing with our time instead of chasing candidates down to see if these 2 or 3 times worked for them. So there's a huge opportunity cost associated with the investment you're making in scheduling interviews as well. As we're going to discuss today, connecting candidates, recruiters, hiring managers, really any internal and external stakeholder is a really difficult task, and it brings with it some unique challenges. As we walk through the different types of stages of interviews, different types and stages of interviews, it's also really important to consider not only the needs directly associated with scheduling, but some of the ancillary business needs that can be addressed when a scheduling strategy is properly implemented. Here, we're just briefly breaking down some of the topics that we found are key to consider as you start to look to drive efficiency in your scheduling process. It's really important to keep all stakeholders in mind when you're looking at adjusting that process, and we'll speak to that a little bit today. Typically, when people think about the interviewing process, they think in 3 buckets, and we have those listed out here in front of you. It's absolutely correct, and there's nothing wrong with grouping your interviews in these 3 buckets. But if an organization is evaluating ways to speed up the process and gather stakeholder feedback in a more effective way, we've learned working with a lot of companies, it's actually more important to evaluate the interviewing scenario than the interviewing medium. So let's take a look at those scenarios. The hiring process is incredibly complex, it's detailed, it's fluid. Scheduling interviews in this process isn't always as simple as just presenting one person's availability and letting somebody select from it. Depending on where in the overall hiring funnel a candidate is, there are any number of internal stakeholders or outside variables that will hinder your ability to get a candidate in front of the right interviewer. As job seekers move deeper and deeper into the recruitment process, these variables tend to increase, while at the same time, the necessity to conduct interviews quickly and efficiently also becomes more important. If we've learned one thing here at RIVS facilitating millions of interviews, its lag time and lack of candidate engagement in this process will absolutely kill the process. As I previously mentioned, only one of the variables to consider is how the parties will connect. Interviewing people on the phone might be easier than interviewing in person because there's no location restraint. However, anybody that's ever hired knows it's not quite that simple. So as you guys look at this, consider all of the ways that you're conducting interviews, all of the people that are involved in that process, and develop a strategy that's unique to each one of those interviewing methods. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to this. Somewhat to the same point, in addition to all the people-related variables to scheduling interviews, it's also important to consider the systems that are already being utilized. It's not going to do your team any good to reduce the time you're spending chasing candidates down to schedule if we're just adding administrative tasks on the back end. This is especially applicable in high volume scenarios because a poorly implemented strategy becomes even more evident at scale. Workflow-based automation, typically in an ATS, CRM, or HRIS, is not only going to remove the administrative tasks, but has the secondary benefit of tying into reporting so that you as a recruitment team or you as an employer can better understand where further improvements can be made into the future. All right, as candidates make it to later stage interviews, we often find that scheduling is actually becoming more complex and more difficult. One of the most common requests or topics that we've heard from companies in the past 12 months is that scheduling interviews with multiple stakeholders tends to be the standard at a later stage interview. And as you can imagine, this is where things get a little bit more difficult when it comes to scheduling. When we talk about multi-stakeholder later stage interviews, we at RIVS tend to break these into two subcategories: back-to-back interviews, so a candidate meeting with multiple stakeholders individually when they're on site or virtually, and panel interviews, so having multiple team members in the same room with the candidate at the same time. Scheduling for each one of these scenarios carries with it its own challenges. I want to make something really clear. Technology is not going to solve everything. The most effective scheduling strategies we've seen implemented include a technology component, but it has to be aligned with a clear communication plan for your internal stakeholders. Communicating on the front end is going to save you a lot of time and hassle on the back end. There are still people involved in this process, and a computer is not going to do it all for you. Chris is going to speak to this in a little bit as well. All right, so here we have a few more different interviewing scenarios lined out. I think it's probably clear at this point. I've made it clear, hopefully, that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to interview scheduling. Different roles, different interviewing strategies, different stages of the interviewing process are all going to bring their own challenges. We've worked with a lot of recruitment teams, and one thing I can definitely say is it is not easy being a recruiter. On top of everything else you guys are tasked with in the day-to-day, having to manage schedules becomes really difficult. But what I can tell you guys is that it is fairly universal. Your pains are not your own. Everybody's going through this. There's absolutely technology that can assist in this process, but what we've also learned is that a properly executed strategy includes more than technology. It includes thinking through the entire process. As I mentioned, thinking about all the stakeholders involved. So before I hand it over to Chris to walk through some of these insights and data points that we've gathered, I'm going to encourage everybody as we go through the next slides to think about how this compares to your process today. Maybe you track some of these metrics, maybe you don't. Some might seem important, some might not. But I think what you'll see as you start tying these different metrics together, they paint a very, very telling picture and provide a huge opportunity to improve the process. So with that said, Chris, back to you.
Fantastic. Thanks, John. So now a little bit of the fun part. So we've got some great insights to share with you today that at RIVS, we're just fortunate enough to have access to the data for a couple of reasons. One, we do millions of interviews. Two, it's in a consistent format. So the fact that it is being done in a technological setting allows access to some key things. So hopefully you find one or two nuggets that you might be able to take back, whether you're using technology or not, that you can leverage today. I think probably one of the most actionable ones is the first one that I've got up here. So our key insight is when candidates are actually choosing to interview. Because the way that automation can work, candidates will choose time slots that make sense for them. And naturally, of the 7 days a week, and yes, some of our clients do interviews or conduct interviews on Saturdays and Sundays. But the most popular interview days chosen by candidates are Tuesdays through Thursdays. And the most popular interview times are 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. The most popular interview day is Wednesday at 1 p.m. Now, why am I rattling off all of these key metrics? One, it's very interesting to be able to see, but the more practical approach to taking this data is take a minute after the session today and look at your calendar this week. And how many opportunities would a candidate have had between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. Tuesday through Thursday of this week? There is a strategic reason we chose 1 p.m. For the webinar, so that way we did not block off your calendar time. Now, if you look at your times that candidates are interviewing, nearly half of those candidates are in the Monday through Thursday 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. window. So if you can, and you have internal meetings, try to schedule them outside that window. If you have a manager that's got a upcoming job, so you know they're going to be scheduling quite a few interviews, or you're going to be scheduling quite a few interviews for them coming up, it might be a nice nugget to share with them to show that you really care about getting these candidates in the door quickly, and ask them to try, if they can, to free up some of the windows between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. Just one piece of insight that we're able to gather in an aggregate level. Again, this is based on the millions of interviews that RIVS does, but it is something that could be collected at an organizational level. The second insight is really around time. So John and I have always known that automation technology can speed up the process and make it more efficient, but it wasn't until we realized there's a lot of nuance to how that works and digging into the actual data to help prove that hypothesis. What we found was that using automation interview scheduling technology allows the organizations to not only schedule the candidates quickly, but also conduct those interviews faster. There's 61% of candidates that were invited to schedule an interview, not only scheduled their interview, but also had that interview conducted within 4 days. So think about that. You've got applications that came in Monday morning, and you've invited those candidates to choose time slots. They'll come in, they'll choose a time slot, and 61% of those candidates are choosing time slots that actually occur before the end of the day on Thursday. And if you think about the impact that has on your overall time to hire, that's why we've now kind of understood why it speeds up the time to hire according to many organizations that we talk to. You can see it right here in the data. 50% of them are doing it within 72 hours. Now, you might ask why that actually is happening. Well, one theory behind it is that when you're actually presenting an automation type of technology, you're giving candidates an option to choose all the potential windows that might work around your parameters as well as theirs. Whereas in the traditional process, we typically see organizations or recruiters will present 3 options to the candidate. So if those 3 options don't work, you have that back and forth fork that John alluded to earlier. Whereas here, you're providing candidates more options to choose from, and therefore getting those interviews conducted faster than they typically are. I think you'll find the last insight is pretty interesting around mobile. A lot of organizations that I speak to really are focused on mobile experience for candidates. But what many of them are focused on is on the front end. How do I attract candidates that are searching for jobs on a mobile device? How do I attract them to hire or to apply to the position? But what you also need to think about is how can I take advantage of the mobile experience after they've applied to a job? Can I have them record a video interview? Can I have them actually schedule their interview or fill out additional paperwork? Almost 21% of our candidates that come through are actually using a mobile device to schedule their interview. So think about it. You're hiring a nurse position, and you've got a number of candidates that are already in their role, and the nurse is walking down the hall between patients and gets a text message, schedule your interview for next week. All they have to do is, with one text, select one of the options, and they've scheduled their interview with your organization without ever having to jump over to a computer, open an email, and choose a time, or call a recruiter back. And that's why the prior metric makes so much sense. You're providing the access to the candidates at the time it makes most sense for them. And we expect this number to continue to increase over time. We've seen it in some of the other technologies that have affected the recruiting process. And so text messaging just makes a lot of sense for those individuals to be able to access their interviews, and particularly those that are passive candidates where you need to quickly access them while they're in the current positions. So we wanted to take a minute and share another poll just to get an understanding what all of you are tracking in your process, if anything. Certainly we understand that some of the metrics may not be accessible to you, but just curious, so I'm going to launch another poll here. If you can select some of the options that you're tracking, or if you're not tracking them, go ahead and select those. We'll see in some responses coming here, so take another minute. Okay, let's go ahead and move this off here. Not surprising that we kind of expected some of these metrics aren't things that you may be able to track or are tracking, and suspect that it's probably because many of you may not have access to some of the data. Those that are tracking the popular interview day times, congratulations. That's one step to being able to kind of manage your own time. That way you can affect or impact the way that candidates are scheduling. I hope you're not going through your calendar one by one and tallying them up. You found some way to either automate that with a spreadsheet or a plugin of some sort. So what does all of the kind of the insights that we've shared, we've got plenty more. John and I thought we'd select some of the ones that might be items that you can take back today. But as John mentioned earlier, you're putting it all together. How does this affect your overall recruiting process? Well, taking a proactive strategy to scheduling, just one little nugget within the recruiting process, but one that recurs over and over again, from phone screen to in-person interview to panel interviews to back-to-back interviews, is something that affects the recruiting process. And so you're going to have the same number of interviews fluctuate time and time again, but one thing's not going to change, is that you're going to have interviews that occur. So implementing some sort of automation to the administrative tasks around scheduling can really provide an impact on winning candidates from one position or one organization to another. We showed you there's opportunities to have the candidates not only schedule, but conduct their interview within, let's say, 4 days here. And so you can actually have that process go through. And that allows you to overall streamline the process for your scheduling. Put this up here. The last thing with regard to kind of winning over candidates is really just understanding what to track and what not. We shared some insights. You know, not every metric is going to be applicable to every organization, and not every organization is going to have the ability to. Applicant tracking systems don't tend to be the end-all be-all when it comes to reporting. So some information you may have to track outside of the overall process. And so if you've actually, if you've kind of caught on to some of the different insights, it's something that we've also been focused on at RIVS, understanding the different technologies that exist out in the space, as well as what organizations are really facing, what kind of hassles are they running through, and how does that provide great opportunities to automate tasks that are rather administrative. You can focus on things like managing candidate relationships, managing hiring manager expectations, sourcing candidates for those tougher to fill jobs. And that's really what the auto scheduler tackles. It tackles those tasks that can be repetitive, use intelligence, integrate with applicant tracking systems, and most importantly, integrate with your calendar. Nobody wants to recreate the wheel and input additional time slots or type out time slots to candidates in emails. And then even when you've got the most complex types of interviews, which is back-to-back or panel interviews, where it's so difficult to get candidates scheduled and coordinated, and then you have that one manager that reschedules. You got to start all over again. And that's really what the interview scheduler technology is focused on, as well as many different opportunities to automate your process. So, John, I wanted to thank you for taking some time to learn a little bit more about the different scheduling approaches. You may not have thought of things like back-to-back panel interviews in your process, but it is important to understand that each one of those scenarios has unique challenges. And if you can focus on providing those insights and data points back to your managers as well as yourselves, you might be able to find opportunities to tweak the timing of those. If you do have any additional information that you'd like to collect regarding technology or whatnot, we will put up another poll towards the end here. And feel free to just select yes, and we can reach out and with some additional information.
And this is John again. I just wanted to thank everybody for taking some time out of your week. We know everyone's incredibly busy, so we hope all of the insights we put together today were helpful for you. If nothing else, just to get the wheels turning. We're here to answer any follow-up questions, and we'd love to share some additional insights with you. So thanks again for taking the time. Please let us know if you have additional questions, and have a great rest of your week.